This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Woo! NBA is up and running. Full steam ahead. So much going on right now, man. Early start of the NBA season. And of course, I'm kicking cans down the road as well, too. Suddenly, I'm a marked man on the in the social media verse out there. So I might have to get my brother on a little bit earlier to back me up, man. I gotta strap on the Kevlar, you know what I'm saying? Because I have no idea who's coming at me on the microphone. Let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw. What's good, my brother? How you living, man? Did any of the strays that came my way nick you?
Well, as a matter of fact, I was taking a look, and I always got your back. But yeah, I had to stay out of the way of that one, man. Sometimes you got your conspiracy theories, but I was actually kind of backing you on this one particular take here. But it's always great when our fans, no matter who they are, interact and engage with us on a regular basis. And we love to have a little debate and a little spicy conversation out there on social media, man. So good job by you getting the conversation going for sure. And as always, salute to all the fans, listeners of NBA Baseline, man. We got another great show, and hopefully that'll keep people talking on the social media, Twitter and Instagram atmospheres.
Yeah, man. And as always, I want to make sure that I highlight, people. We're here to respect, not disrespect. So big shout outs to Coast to Coast NBA Pod. If people were following, my rant, you called it a rant. I just called it a soliloquy of logic. Okay. But while I was having that soliloquy of logic, our peoples from Coast to Coast NBA podcast wanted to chime in and weigh in on their perspective about whether or not the Clippers and the Lakers are, should be considered as a true rivalry. And listen, man, there's nothing wrong with the back and forth, man. There's nothing wrong with the banter and giving perspective. And I'm always for, even if in the end we agree to disagree. So I just wanted to make sure I give a shout outs because they brought good perspective from their end. And again, I take nothing from where they're coming from, when they're looking from their perspective about what that series should mean to them and whether or not it should or shouldn't be a rivalry from the outset. And they see where my position stands. They understand where I'm coming from as well, too. So as always, man, whenever we give our perspective, when we give our opinions, we encourage each and every single person. Give us your thoughts, man. No thought should ever be discouraged or diminished unless it's just totally out of completely lunacy. Then, we'll have to probably tell you to step off. But in the end, very rarely will that ever happen because once again, man, it's all love when we talk about the game of basketball. So as my man Shaw had alluded to, we have got a great show on tap. We're going to be talking about the Golden State Warriors, maybe the Golden State Warriors. Woes is probably the best way to pronounce what's going on out there at the G-Dub. So much happening, man, and they're going to be the focus on our breakdown conversation. And then on the drop, my man Sean and I, man, we're going to highlight on whether or not the effectiveness of coaches calling out their team and their players still has significance in this current NBA climate. So I think that there's some really great thought and perspective that's going to be dropped on this, man. And this is a hellified show. And we always, again, appreciate each and every single one of y'all hopping on board with us. Be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. You know where to find us, man. Powered by Lineups. You know how we roll. We always encourage you, whatever platform you use to listen to your podcast. If you're a new listener for us, please look for the Baseline NBA podcast, add us to your playlist, kick back, relax, and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all of the relevant things happening in the association. You know how we do, you know how we roll. Let's get it started with the breakdown. Time to break it down.
I break you down to the bone gristle.
You got me like pass me.
Or is it?
Time now for the breakdown. Callie Warrenshaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. And our topic for the breakdown, woes to we The Golden State Warriors, aka the Golden State Woziers. I definitely would not want to be the one to try and replicate that 3 times fast. But the Golden State Warriors have been, easy to say that they've been a disappointment at 1-5. I think the thing that is more stark than anything, Shaw, is right now Murphy's Law is what's being applied to this basketball team. What can go wrong is going wrong for this team. Fresh out of a new arena being constructed for what they've accomplished. You can make the argument that the writing was on the door about the state of mind and the status of this team coming into this season, really off of what transpired in the finals against the Toronto Raptors and what was going to take place with Kevin Durant. And you just still felt like with the roster that they still had constructed, even without having Klay Thompson, that this team would still be good enough to be able to ride out the storm, so to speak, and right themselves properly. But I think that there is something, to me, I think really kind of emanated from what we're seeing here. And in many respects, maybe that is a good thing. It's a bad thing. I know your perspective on this may trail a little bit differently, but I think where we need to begin with this, Shaw, is did we really see this coming truly and authentically when we're talking about Golden State after the run that they've had over the last 5 years?
Nobody, not even the Golden State Warriors themselves, could have seen this coming in the way that it has. The great Mark Stein, I think he put out a tweet, I think after one of their recent losses, and it was something like the last 5 regular games, the games that counted for the Warriors, they lost Klay Thompson, they lost Kevin Durant, and they lost Stephen Curry. And that is something that no matter what they did, they could have possibly thought, okay, this is what is going to be our future in the 2019-2020 season. And now they're stuck relying on guys that nobody really knows. The lineup they put out here over the course of this past weekend was foreign to even the most astute NBA fans. Like, who's that? Like the Charles Barkley thing, who he played for type situation. Like, we had no idea who some of these young gentlemen were out there. And this Golden State roster is very much in a state of disarray. And they're reformalizing where they're going to go in the direction that needs to go this upcoming season. And I think that leads into the topic of conversation about what does this Golden State Warrior team need to do moving forward this year.
So you bring up some really great points, Shaw, but I'm going to go back to this because, minus all of the brouhaha that's taking place about how disappointing this basketball team is, I think the first thing that needs to be highlighted is the Golden State Warriors have been somewhat exposed, okay? Do you recall when in the height of Golden State's dominance in the NBA, Myers, Latham, and the management, they were the ones who said, we feel like we're ahead of the game. We feel like we are beyond the standard right now, that everybody is just still trying to catch up to what we're doing, right? They believe that they were the future and everyone is still stuck in the past. And I feel like what we have seen structured as far as into this upcoming season, whether we were teetering on more of putting it on the fact that you have a 2-time MVP and a 3-time champion, Steph Curry, a 2-time champion, a 3-time champion, and Draymond Green, that those guys and Steve Kerr were going to kind of help weather the storm and right the ship and make things look like what we remembered what the Golden State Warriors had represented for us, which is a standard that not elevated us for the 5 years that we've been talking about them. This has been beyond that, Shaw. These guys have been doing this for more than 5 years. I think that what this has done is that this has exposed the fallacy that the Golden State management has been kind of laying over us for quite some time. I don't think that they were truly prepared for what was about to take place for them in this upcoming season. And even if the Golden State Warriors would have something of a successful season, Shaw, it's still in my mind, and just from my perspective, I can't speak for everyone. I can't speak for the Golden State fans, for the beat writers that cover Golden State, and for anyone else who had these expectations about what was going on. I knew at some point this part of what we're seeing is a vulnerability now, is the lack of attention to detail by the management to properly address what made the Golden State Warriors as great as they've been for the 8 years, is that they had developed a lineup that was not just competitive, but also had evolved within the talent that they had. And this now shows me that they did not prepare for this properly. They don't have the culpable talent that's required for them to do what even they're thinking about doing. And now we have to go in with more questions about what the outcome will be for this basketball team, even if you get Steph, Clay, and Draymond Green back fully healthy, because that, in my opinion, is not the complete circle of why we talk about the Golden State Warriors and being the type of team that they've been for the 5 years that they have been dominant, that they built this dynasty around of.
Well, way to kick them when they're down, bro. I mean, this is, this Warriors team, I think is, it's tough. It really is, because one of the things that I will give them credit for, and I want to play the glass half full here, so give me a couple minutes to let this breathe, right? I think they've done a pretty decent job in years past of getting the complementary parts, finding the Patrick McCaws and guys like that who can, Quinn Cooks, who can just fill in gaps, for their starters. Because at the end of the day, those starters cost them a lot of money to field a championship level team and to win at the rate that they did for the last couple seasons, right? So those supplemental pieces and parts, they were great at finding second round draft picks, late first round picks, et cetera, and adding them to the puzzle. But the bill ultimately comes due, and life comes at you so fast, when you're a team of this caliber. And now the injuries mount because you cannot field a roster that is going to be as formidable and as deep. You lose veteran guys, Iguodala, Livingston, et cetera, and now this team looks completely mortal. Again, no idea who they put out the floor on this past weekend. And I think the one thing that the Golden State roster now, and Bob Myers specifically, has to figure out is, what are we doing right now this year? Is this something where we are trying to salvage, or do we abandon our pride in some aspect and not necessarily tank, because you're not tanking, you're just not good. But do you figure out ways like, hey, we need to limit Draymond's minutes. We need to keep D'Angelo Russell healthy. Do we even want to keep D'Angelo Russell at all? All the things that they wanted to do and see this season, they don't have the opportunity because Curry's going to be out for 3 months, and Draymond Green's battling ligament damage in his fingers or whatever. So who knows how long he'll actually be out? The question remains now: do they trade D'Angelo Russell, or do they wait for that to come back? And do they liken it back to the years where some of our fans, listeners, may not even remember? I look at this and think very much in a lot of ways of the San Antonio Spurs right before Tim Duncan came to the league. And he was a franchise-altering player. And I don't think there's a franchise-altering player right now in college that's going to come in and make that type of impact that Duncan did, especially in his first year. Mm-hmm. But think about this, that Spurs team was pretty good. They lost David Robinson, get onto the lottery, somehow skip the Celtics that were supposed to be the number one pick. They get Tim Duncan, and look where that franchise leads. If Golden State keeps all of their pieces intact and gets everybody back and healthy, yes, Curry will be 31, 32 years old. Klay Thompson comes back, Draymond comes back, and they get a number 1 or number 2 draft pick. Well, we might be looking at the same crap all over again, where they start to, again, another run where they can try to get back to the mountaintop. But that's a long way away, and those are a lot of ifs, ands, buts, and thens. You know what I mean? But this Golden State team has a lot to figure out. And I ask you, my dude, really, what do you think they should do with this team and this roster this year?
All right, so so I want to make sure that I set the tenor properly, because before you brought this question, you had elevated the point. One of our peoples who listens to our podcast, our man Slick Partner, aka I call him Mr. Nukem, Duke Nukem. My man has been talking about blowing up this basketball team the moment that we start seeing Warriors players drop like flies. And one of the things that I was putting as an emphasis was, it's not realistic, in my opinion, for you to start blowing up this basketball team, because I feel like with the way that this team has been constructed, this team made us believe in what we see in the current climate of today's NBA. And by blowing up this basketball team, it is almost as if you are negating, in a way, the evolution of where the game is gone to. These guys are a direct a reflection or a catalyst to why we're seeing the game being played the way that it is. And it's not as if Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green aren't capable of still spearheading that as we, continue on. They just need to be healthy to be able to do it. So I didn't find that to be a plausible solution to what we're seeing right now with Golden State. However, this goes back to my point, Shaw, and why I said the Golden State management and organization was caught with their pants down. Because when you had what was going on with Steph, Draymond, and Clay, it wasn't as if these guys had stayed healthy in their 5-year run. They had intermittently had serious injuries during the course of their runs. And in that course, they always had players. They always had guys that they could put in there, even guys that they picked up off of waivers who came in and contributed. I go back to what we were talking about, Anderson Varejao, right? He was basically in the back of the bench for the Cleveland Cavaliers. He comes over to Golden State, and in a critical time when they lose all of their front court play, and Draymond Green wasn't 100%, Anderson Varejao came in and produced minutes. He came in and continued to produce for the Golden State Warriors while they were still running neck and neck with the Houston Rockets in the Western Conference. And so it's hard for me to imagine that when we're talking about this Golden State team, and I get it, it's all too much to handle when all of your 3 all-star starting players are not on the roster. But Shaw, look at the players that are on this roster. And what I'm saying is, even if you get these 3 guys back, you're still going to have to come with the grim reality that these guys were not even contributing when you had a healthy Steph Curry, when you had a healthy Draymond Green, and even if you get a Klay Thompson. So part of that to me leans more on what is Steve Kerr getting out of the Omari Spellmans, the Glenn Robinson IIIs, the Kevon Looneys before he got injured, the Willie Cauley-Stein. I want to know what Steve Kerr is going to do to get these guys in a position for us to buy into this Golden State Warriors making up for what they clearly are not going to get, even if you get back Curry, Thompson, and Draymond. And the point that I'm making to that part, Shaw, is you're not going to worry about that even if you get that in the draft. No one player in the draft is going to give them what we've seen Golden State evolve and do through the 8 years, is continue to get the guys to play around them to elevate the team, not just the star players on their roster.
Well, that's their challenge, and this is where Kerr and Bob Myers specifically, they have to earn their money. I think in a lot of ways you feel like, yeah, they did that because they won championships. Some people take something away from them because they've had superstars in order to do so. But at the end of the day, now it's like, all right, well, this is where you really show who you are as a coach and as a general manager. How do you get people and acquire the talent on this team to get you back to that space where you have been for the last 5-6 seasons, right? And with Kerr, it's very interesting because I don't know. I don't know if I don't doubt he's a good coach, but we've only seen him with elite level talent or a talent that was on the cusp of becoming elite, especially when you go into that first year. These are a bunch, and no disrespect at all, but these are a bunch of no-name guys. And how can he coach them up to play their proverbial roles when presumably the young guys, the old veteran guys come back now and they're trying to make a next run?
The last time that Steve Kerr saw this kind of entity of a roster, he wasn't even a head coach. He was the GM for the Phoenix Suns. Okay? Yeah. I mean, and I'm not putting this just on Steve Kerr, but what I am saying, Shaw, is if you were telling me a couple years ago when they were asking the question to Golden State about them being the standard, the golden standard, being ahead of the curve, you couldn't tell me that this wasn't eventually going to come to fruition, especially after what you did to Andre Iguodala. You literally forced for Sean Livingston to retire. Right? So it isn't as if there was an incentive for even these guys to want to come back and play because the organization had already made up their mind about what they were trying to do. And I guess to me, the biggest thing that I'm taking from this is what are you really trying to project to fans about this Golden State Warriors team? To me, the point that I'm making is this shouldn't just be on the shoulders of Steph Curry. I think you're doing a disservice to Steph Curry by saying because he's a 2-time MVP, he's got this. He's good with this. Steph Curry represents to me what the New York Yankees had done with Derek Jeter and what they had with the core 4. They collectively built this thing up, and you gave Steph Curry the time and opportunity for him to do what he does best, for why we loved him and what he was doing in that little stretch that he was doing. To me, I feel like by what they were trying to do, even from the outset in game 1 against the Los Angeles Clippers, I think it was, they were making, this is Steph Curry's team moving forward. It's always been Steph Curry's team. It should never have been that way. It was that core's team. It was the guys that you drafted, that you started this dynasty with, that gave, Mark Jackson his platform. That's how that should have been reflected. That's how it still should be looked at. And I think that the Warriors, in a way, I don't want to say deceived us. They didn't deceive us, but I think that they misdirected the intention of what they were trying to show us as they were opening up this new arena and moving into this new era of how we should perceive Golden State Warriors basketball, that it's going to fall on just one player's shoulders. I really think that they have to remember there was a core that built this dynasty of this stretch that they've had, and they need to get back to that part of it, because I think that's the only way that you salvage D'Angelo Russell, and I think that's the only way that you instill the confidence of some of these guys are going to have to stay on this roster if and when Curry, Thompson, and Green get back on being healthy and contributing to this basketball team.
Well, I mean, I think that's a very interesting point, because this Warriors team, I don't think they tried to deceive anybody. And again, I know you're not using that term, and especially not in a negative light, so to speak. It's just, they set very lofty goals and standards for themselves. So now that the bill has come due, well, you took all the accolades. We have to take some of the criticism as well. The caveat to all of that, to me, though, is that it costs money. It costs major money to have a roster of this caliber. And they couldn't, in their heart of hearts, say, all right, well, we're not going to give Klay Thompson the max. We're not going to give Curry the max. Like, they couldn't do those things. And when you have two max guys at the amount of years that they've been in the league, making roughly $78 million just between Curry and Klay Thompson, all your money is gone. And that doesn't leave you a lot of space to get the requisite talent that is necessary. And yeah, they maybe could have seen the KD thing coming and him leaving this season. But at the end of the day, they had to play it out to the very end, because in some ways, like, the fan base would have been non-forgiving if they said, all right, well, they just let Kevin Durant walk. It's the perception of keeping a championship contender intact. And that part of it, maybe, just maybe they missed the boat on with that. But at the end of the day, they had to keep Klay, they had to keep Curry, and not just keep them, they had to pay them and pay Draymond as well, too. So the one good thing, again, is you get D'Angelo Russell. You can potentially use him as a trade chip, as I alluded to a little bit earlier. Maybe whether that's this year or next year, whatever the case may be, you can utilize that, and maybe you can diversify and get some different assets to fill out the rest of this roster, because I think they're going to keep the core guys together that won them so many championships.
But I think the one thing that I do want to see, and I think maybe even some Golden State Warrior fans want to see, is we want to see what are you actually trying to bake in the oven, right? Like, listen. You look at the roster of players for this team currently, right? Jordan Poole, right? We don't know what this guy particularly is. We don't know if he's more of an offensive, defensive type of player. Okay, Glenn Robinson III. We've said this guy clearly, if given the basketball, this guy can get you buckets. I mean, people have said that he in many respects can score a hell of a lot better than his pops does, right? Alec Burke has always been a solid player. He just can't stay healthy. Omari Spellman, coming from Villanova, a successful basketball program. The guy has got like a Draymond Green DNA in him, right? Eric Pascal, same way. Hard-nosed type of player. Guy that goes after it, hustles. You know what I'm saying? He's not completely big on the scoring, but he is somebody that he bodies up guys and plays it. There are certain components that we have already seen in the first 6 games, regardless of the wins and losses, Shaw, that you can take from this and say, you know what, we were talking about this with some of the other players that the Golden State Warriors have had on this roster before. The Quinn Cooks, right? The Ian Clarks, you know what I'm saying? Whether or not they were backcourt players that can do what we knew that they couldn't do what Steph and Klay did. But when they came in, they had an impact. The Patrick McCaws, you know what I'm saying, guys that, we're trying to find out what those guys are. I'm just wondering, where is Steve Kerr's investment in finding that out? How soon are we going to see that? And it's hard for me to say we're going to see that in the midst of a team that might, to your point, Shaw, where the T word might be coming into play. Where now already the speculation is embrace the take. What are we trying to embrace here, right? Because no matter what happens, even if you get Steph, Clay, and Draymond Green back, these are still the things that we're going to be questioning about this basketball team. Are they going to be good offensively? Will they ever get back to what they used to do defensively? It's hard to say that because the players that you currently have right now have not been identified just yet. And your expectation is you got to coach these guys up to be able to do that. So even in the losses that they're taking right now, Shaw, right? You don't see either way, right or left, where when the core guys come back, they can use these players that they currently have right now to even do something significant with them. Now you're relying on the fact that you're going to have to do something in the free agency, which again is not a guarantee because it goes right back to the style of play and the coaching that is taking place to get those players on the same page with your core three players.
Well, yeah, there's nothing they can do in free agency. Bobby Marks had even, he tweeted out, and I had hit him up on Twitter, and not that Marks and I are friends, but he replied back to my tweet and just saying, listen, this Warriors team is stuck. Like there's nothing they can really do right now because the old usual suspects, Carmelo, Jamal Crawford and J.R. Smith, hey, they need offense. Can you bring in some of those guys? Like they can't even do anything right now. They can bring them in at minimum contracts, but they have all these roster spots that are locked up. They'd have to find ways to get rid of this, and then they're already paying the luxury tax.
Can I throw something in there, Shaw? To me personally, I don't think that this should be about whether or not these guys can go out there and score. I really don't. I think this needs to come down to, will these guys be able to play cohesively as a team and contribute in all of the other things that I think that the Golden State Warriors will be lacking when Curry and Thompson and Draymond Green come back. Something was interesting about what I saw a week ago, Shaw, when we had that whole thing happening with Draymond Green coming out, and saying, yeah, man, we suck right now, man. This is just embarrassing. A lot of people aren't talking about this. I know that everyone highlighted more of his demeanor and his attitude. But Shaw, this to me is indicative of what I thought was wrong with where Draymond Green is right now. I don't know if he's completely gotten over whatever happened between him and Kevin Durant and him and Bob Myers and what the organization did in suspending him for that game. But what I'm seeing here is, where is it that Draymond Green is going to have an influence on the Omari Spellmans and the Eric Paschals? And when has he ever had an influence on the Kevon Looneys? You know what I'm saying? And the Willie Cauley-Steins. Like, to me, even if the Golden State Warriors don't have any kind of offense, you will eventually get that when you get Clay and Steph back. But at some point, you would want to see that effort, defense, physicality would still be in play when we're talking about Draymond Green. And I don't know if whether or not that's going to come through. Even if we're talking about him being injured for a short period of time, I'm talking about how he is verbalizing that heart and soul of why we appreciated the Golden State Warriors. I'm not seeing that from Draymond. And to me is what should be indicative of what we see from these guys on this roster, because that to me will more so embrace the idea that they do or they don't want to tank.
Well, I don't think they're too proud to actually utilize that word in itself. The interesting thing about Draymond is, he's got to talk the talk. You know what I mean? He's got to walk the talk. Sorry. And at the end of the day, he's a champion. He wants to be a leader. He's gotten, his money, so to speak. And then he feels like, okay, this is an organization that has invested in him. At the end of the day, Durant's no longer there. It's back to them as the core three of this roster. And while they're all banged up and facing, potentially a lost season, how do they come back from that? And who has a better story than Draymond, who probably shouldn't even be here to begin with? In the way that a lot of people evaluated him and thought what type of player he was going to be. So I think his ability now to figure out whatever this season is going to be, and maybe that's a conversation Myers, Kerr, and Lacob and all those guys need to have with this roster and say, all right, what are we trying to get out of the season? We need to reevaluate what our priorities and goals are going to be. And if Draymond is going to be relatively healthy enough to take a foot on the court, then he's got to be a leader and coach up some of these young guys to get them ready for whatever that next step is going to be in Golden State's evolution as a basketball team and franchise. That's what has to happen for Draymond Green this year. But again, it's still a matter of how much does he play? Can they reset their mindset? Because at the end of the day, we don't believe this is a team that is now going to make the playoffs without Curry, without Klay Thompson for the year. All the thoughts of them coming in now and being a team that can upset somebody in the first round, all that's out the window. So while they're not tanking per se, this is a development year for all the guys that you just mentioned, Paulie Stein, Jordan Pools, even now Kai Bowman, who I just learned about 2 or 3 nights ago. What do these guys now contribute to this roster so that they can get ready for Golden State is back at full strength, hopefully?
One thing, too, that I want to highlight that I think is very important about this team is Steve Kerr has to figure out a way to elevate the backcourt to play with a mentality that is not reflective of someone who is used to having Steph Curry on that basketball court. Okay. When I say that, I mean, I see a lot of one-on-one dribbling. I don't see a lot of ball movement from the Golden State Warriors. I still see a team that still seems like they're searching for where they need to be and where guys need to be. I don't know if part of that is centered around them relying on a guy like D'Angelo Russell, who is he's a solid player off the dribble from time to time. But he, to me, should not be a ball handler for that type of basketball team. You know what I'm saying? The last time that we saw a team like that where D'Angelo Russell would be considered as a primary ball handler, he was playing with the Los Angeles Lakers. We saw what his career reflected with that happening, right? You can see the evolution of his game once Kenny Atkinson put him in the right position. I think it's incumbent upon Steve Kerr to recognize that now. And maybe this is a good thing, because even if the intent down the road is that the Golden State Warriors want to move D'Angelo Russell, you cannot tell me that you're going to move him, forcing him to play in the kind of offense where his ball handling skills is something similar to what you were getting from Klay Thompson or what you were getting from Steph Curry. He don't play that kind of way. Part of the reason why I said that I think D'Angelo Russell works well with a guy like Steph Curry and Klay is because you know who's got the basketball, Steph Curry, and he's going to find D'Angelo Russell. That's not something that D'Angelo Russell has to worry about. In essence, D'Angelo Russell is a smaller de facto Kevin Durant in his ability to score the basketball now. And even in the beginning of that season, before Steph broke his hand, you can still see the struggle with D'Angelo Russell finding himself in that offense, which part of me, again, goes back to what does Steve Kerr really want from the guys that he's got on that floor? And I think now it's going to be highlighted even more significantly because he's got to rely on D'Angelo Russell to be that primary scorer. It's almost as if he's got to go back to the beginning when he first inherited this team from Mark Jackson, and the Golden State Warriors were no more as a good team defensively, but struggled to score the ball offensively. That's the Steve Kerr who the Golden State Warriors are going to need for this period of time until they get their full roster back.
Well, I'll say one more thing about Curry specifically, and Kerr had mentioned it. I want to say maybe after the second game, right before the third, right before they beat the Pelicans for their only win of the season as we record. Right, he more or less said that they don't have the ability to just give the ball to Curry and get out the way. They cannot James Harden their offense, if you will.
Exactly.
Because Curry is not. He's still a slider frame. He's not used to that type of usage in terms of just trying to break down the offense every single play. Like, that's not what they're predicated.
And did you notice as well too, Shaw, the ball movement for this basketball team is much slower. Now, maybe part of that is because they don't know where to go, how to come off their screens, how to curl off, and you know what I'm saying? But you can clearly see that it's kind of like how we deal with right now from time to time, Shaw, when we connect for us to do the podcast. There are moments where we're clear as day, and you can come in whenever you hear my voice end and drop. Then there are moments where you can barely hear me. I'm skipping. I'm in and out. That's what the Warriors look like right now. They're skipping and they're in and out. There's no fluidity to what they're doing right now. And even if you were wanting to rely on Steph Curry to help move that forward, it's not going to happen. A lot of it is going to be directed mightily, heavily by Steve Kerr's influence on these guys and where they need to be until they get to a point where these guys can do it on their own.
Yeah, and that is the mantra I think that a lot of teams are going to face this year in general, just because you have so many moving parts to it. But now you have completely guys who haven't really had much of a role in the NBA, let alone coming to a new team and a new scheme. And that's what Golden State faces right now. So Kerr has got to take this year, institute his offense and his defense, get these guys acclimated to their specific roles, and then what kind of leader can D'Angelo Russell and Draymond Green be to these guys in the interim time? Do they end up figuring it out towards the end of the season where they can be very competitive? But in the interim, I think there's going to be a lot of blowouts and a lot of tough losses for the Golden State.
One other thing, Shaw, that I wanna bring out there. First of all, for anybody who wants to sit there and be like, oh, this team is, they don't have the hustle, they don't have the effort. No, that's not the case. This team is reflective of a basketball team that is so unaccustomed to losing and losing the way that they're losing. Okay. It is not a question of whether or not this team doesn't have talent. There are moments that Glenn Robinson III, I really think, man, he sneakily, he could be a sneaky, you talk about here's a window of opportunity for us, Shaw, to talk about Glenn Robinson III as most improved player in the NBA. Right? This is his opportunity for him to kind of make a name for himself when he's been fading in and out of the shadows, of finding a place in the game. He could easily be doing that right now in Golden State. Whether or not he takes it upon himself to do that, that's one thing. But the bigger point that I wanted to make about this, Shaw, and we'll end it on this. The one thing that, and I've said this so many times before, Shaw, basketball IQ. One of the reasons why we talk about this Golden State Warriors team the way that we do is because in this period of when we've had Steph and Clay and Draymond, this was a team that had an elevated basketball IQ. They didn't have, the super athleticism that you see in the Russell Westbrooks, the LeBron Jameses, or in, or in the fashion of the Blake Griffins, during our period, during our time. You know what I'm saying? These guys knew exactly who they were, what they can do, and they built on top of that. But where they accelerated, where they staked their claim, where we saw them be the championship caliber pedigree type team that they've been, is where their basketball IQ had shined. This team is lacking basketball IQ. Okay. And part of the reason why you're going to see these blowouts is because they don't know how to play the kind of game that we have seen in the 5 years that Golden State has done. It's been easy for Myers and those guys to bring players on who their elevated basketball IQ can make up for the things that they couldn't give you athletically on the basketball court. But for right now, for a lot of these guys, they can't put these components together to play at the level that we're used to seeing. And I think people have to appreciate part of that. That's not to say that, it's part of the tanking process. It's part of the process of seeing how long will it be before you can truly understand whether or not Golden State has the right players on their roster. And this is the period for them to really see that happen. So as much as people want to see this whole thing about tanking going on, they have to be very leery about their perception of what that's supposed to mean, because no matter what kind of players you put on this roster, if they don't have the kind of basketball IQ that syncs with what you see from Curry and Clay and from Draymond when they're on the basketball court, this Warriors team will never play to the level that we've seen them play over the last 8 years.
Well said, my dude. So, I think for all our fans, listeners, want to hear your thoughts on what the Golden State Warriors should potentially do this year. Or do you believe our longtime follower and listener, slick partner, blow it up, trade everybody, and start anew? Or do you ride this out and just try to institute a culture or reinstitute a culture, maybe with some new parts that can make your team successful in the future?
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cali, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cali, Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. And now, topic for The Drop. Are coaches calling out their teams and their players still an effective method of holding a team accountable when they're not living up to set expectations? Recently, Mike Malone and Steve Clifford of both of their teams, the Denver Nuggets and the Orlando Magic, have recently been in front of the microphone and have essentially called out their team's lackluster performances and struggles so far in the early outset of the season. And it's kind of brought to light, an interesting question my man Shaw has elevated to us and is elevating to you guys. If what you see is a coach calling out their team in the public view and really, I don't want to use the word throwing them under the bus. Maybe throwing them under a semi, in a way, is probably more a little adequate. Is that an effective method to get these guys to get out of their funk and start playing to the level of expectations that we thought that they should be playing?
And I think the biggest conversation piece to this is it depends on the team, the coach, and the relationship. We've seen where this can alienate a locker room, and you can't come back from it. And you've seen where it maybe in some ways it's galvanized if you have a mature locker room and guys can take the heat. I think in these most recent examples, we have Mike Malone with a Nuggets team that has a bunch of expectations upon them, and while they have a winning record, they just haven't come out and dominated against teams in the way that we probably thought they could have and should have. Jokic obviously he's overweight. He looks a little bit listless. Jamal Murray not playing like the most improved player that a lot of people thought he'd be, including myself. And there's just a lot of moving parts to this team that doesn't seem to be working. Then you have Clifford calling out the Magic, and he calling out himself, as well. And he understands that as the coach, you have to take responsibility because it's going to come your way. And it's one of the most thankless jobs in sports. When teams are going well, the coach is one of the last people to always get recognized. It's always the players, right? But I think in general, this conversation is very interesting because it really does depend on the team, the coach, the roster, the situation, maybe even in the time of the year. And I think for these two situations, for two teams that made the playoffs last year, Orlando sneaking in, if you will, and then Denver getting to a certain point that a lot of people thought they would have, the early season pressures of them not living up to the expectations is what's causing these coaches to jump off the deep end. And now we got to see how they respond. But traditionally, it's a very, very slippery slope that these coaches go down to if they go out there and decide to call up their teams.
So, it's interesting that this question is being posed so early in the outset, but I do feel like, Shaw, this is actually good timing for this question to actually be posed. And I think it's equally important that we're highlighting both the Denver Nuggets and the Orlando Magic. You want to know why? Because you're probably not going to hear that from Brett Brown in Philadelphia, who's under the hot seat, if he doesn't get this Philadelphia 76ers team to an NBA Finals. You're probably not going to hear that from the Houston Rockets and Mike D'Antoni, who's working with two, MVP players on their roster, and a team that a couple of years ago found themselves playing in the Western Conference Finals, right? And the reason why I highlight both of these two dynamics is look at what both Steve Clifford and Mike Malone have been working with the last season and going into this season. I think part of the reason why this may actually be effective is when you look at the rosters for both of these teams, where in it is there that quote unquote superstar element that might be a de facto distraction to the important or the overlaying point that's being made here about why the coach is calling out this basketball team. This team is struggling specifically in areas that I think that even we expected, people who are looking into the numbers specifically, defensively, and also, offensively, the things that were supposed to be highlighted and emphasized in the offseason. And I feel like if there's any coaches right now that can get away with doing it, it's probably coaches that have the kind of roster that is constructed. Even if this has been a successful basketball team last season in the Denver Nuggets, and even with the Orlando Magic, both making the playoffs, one being a 1 seed, one basically taking a game away from a team that wound up winning the NBA championship. No matter what you may think, these guys individually haven't proven themselves from an individual aspect where they feel like their manhood in the game should be threatened by coaches who clearly were important cogs to why these teams are successful. And I think that that's something that people need to pay attention to, because maybe at the early outset, we can get away with doing it. And later on, if there are players that elevate themselves, like the Jamal Murrays and the Aaron Gordons, of their teams respectively, that they may not be able to ease that into the conversation again. They may not be able to get away with doing that in front of the microphone said time frame next time around.
I think that's a great point, actually, because I think the two guys that we're talking about right now, they're actually very confident in their standing. Mike Malone just signed an extension. Clifford comes here 1 year wonder, if you will, gets that team into the playoffs. So they feel like, hey, you know what? I have a little bit of moxie and I have the backing of my general management. The question still remains, though, do they have full control and mastery of their locker room? And I'm more so worried about Clifford in the early going. And again, I think he was a little lighter in his approach because he maybe doesn't have the same footing that Malone does. But the expectations aren't as great in Orlando as they are in Denver. And I think if you're trying to preach a championship level culture, you do maybe want to nip some things in the bud pretty early on if you're the Denver Nuggets. But it remains to be seen what either one of these franchises, how they matriculate through the rest of the year. Orlando didn't necessarily respond, in the way that, Clifford would have liked. They ended up playing Denver, to be very honest. So, and then in Denver in a very, very competitive game. But it took some heroics by Jokic towards the end there for that to come to fruition for Denver in itself. And I just want to see how this continues to move forward, and do coaches in general utilize this now throughout the course of the year. What coaches have the balls in essence to come out here and call out their teams if things start to go awry? Because in the case of Denver, they weren't bad. They just weren't playing up to their level of their capability. In Orlando's situation, they're definitely below 500, and they need to be better than they've shown.
Well, so the thing that I think really concerns me, Shaw, when we're talking about the Denver Nuggets is Jamal Murray, gets this, bag secured, right, in the offseason, right? He gets a nice sizable contract, right? So we know that he's a core player. And to come out and struggle the way that he's struggling right now has to make you wonder, at what point does what Mike Malone did not then suddenly blend into, I'm talking to you, Jamal. I'm talking to you, Jokic. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that right now what we're seeing is exactly what a coach should do so that he is inclusive to everyone who is attributing to their struggles and not excluding anyone specifically to them getting out of those struggles, right? But I would like to see, and it'll be interesting, where the voice really resonates from the Denver Nuggets, right? Because when I see something like this, Shaw, it's very easy for us to say, okay, well, their voice is Mike Malone. So it doesn't matter what Nikola Jokic is doing. It doesn't matter what Jamal Murray or Gary Harris or any of those guys are running. It doesn't matter what they're trying to say if they have closed door meetings. It ultimately is going to resonate from the coach if he is constantly the person who is coming out and speaking on these things. That's one thing that we really didn't see take precedence last year with the Denver Nuggets. Maybe to our mistake because we didn't follow this team closely enough, or we didn't buy into whether or not it was about this team closely enough. But now that we have seen that this team was on the brink of possibly making it to the Western Conference Finals, and we've seen the emergence of Jokic as being a possible MVP type player, and we see the coming of age for Jamal Murray and what he has contributed to this team, we need to figure out who the real voice is. Who is the Draymond Green on that team? You know what I'm saying? Who is the person that's going to speak the words that manifest this team getting out of these type of situations that they may be in it right now? And it'll be interesting to see if whether or not it still stays in the throat of Mike Malone or if it comes out of the esophagus of somebody else on that roster.
So let me ask you this, and I know we're pressed for time here, but it's an interesting thing. Like, let's relate this to kind of like a real life situation. Something could happen at your job, right? Your place of business, and it's one employee who's kind of effing up. This employee is just kind of doing the same thing, but the manager comes in now, calls a meeting, and it's group discipline. And say, hey guys, remember, this is our policy, blah, 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 blah. But it's John Doe, it's Mike F up. He's the one who we're really talking about right now. Do coaches really have the ability to do that in the NBA, to go out here, because they can't go out here and alienate the stars, because Malone can't go out here and say, it's you, Jamal Murray, with your back secured. It's you, Jokic, with your back secured. I think that's very interesting, because I want to transition it to Orlando, where Clifford, he said the coaches and the best players are held responsible. He didn't name the best players, but you can take a guess at who those best players are supposed to be. Aaron Gordon, Nikola Vucevic. Those are the guys who need to step up, right? But what is your thought process when it comes to that? Because it's really funny because you in the NBA you cannot call out really call out your guy unless you're Pop. You know what I mean? Probably the only one who can do that. You cannot call out your superstar. It is very much a group discipline type of approach when you may be speaking to one or two specific players.
So much to your point, Shaw, I'm going to go back to the hypothetical in the job, right? And then I'm going to bring that to the point of what we're talking about, say, with the Orlando Magic. At your job, you usually have people on that team. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be the manager. It could be the person next to the manager. It could be the person that may be groomed to take over that position to manage, right? But there's somebody that's been on that team for so many years. They know the ins and outs and the workings of what's been going on. That's going to basically go to the direct person, to Joe Schmo, and be like, hey, man, I just want you to know that recently certain things have been coming up regarding our performance and everything like that. And part of that is affecting other people. Like, you can go specifically to that person and say, I need you to really step up, because I'm telling you right now, when they come back and they have to keep asking where the problem is, who's creating this issue, what do you think needs to be done? They're going to have to start naming names specifically. And so you're not trying to call them out and say that they're horrible and nothing like that. But as the veteran who understands the inner workings, the flow, the dynamic of who's to be held accountable, you're trying to get this person to say, don't put me in a position where I have to throw you under the bus, because they already know. So to that point, Shaw, let me bring this back to the Orlando Magic. The DJ Augustins, the Evan Fourniers, the Terrence Rosses, right? If you're not already getting this from Aaron Gordon, if you're not already getting this from Nikola Vucevic, these guys have got to start getting in their ear, right? If you're not gonna rely on it only being Steve Clifford, these guys have to start getting in their ear and saying, as a veteran, I've seen how this plays, man. This is what starts happening when the coach starts doing this. It's not like you're trying to start mutiny or nothing. You're giving them the real talk. It's like, if at some point Steve Clifford wants you to be that person, you have got to be this kind of way. Because to me, Shaw, when we get down this road, when we start trailing down this path, when we start really eyeing into this stuff, this is what we question about why you have to put so many veterans on your basketball team, right? Because if the veterans are supposed to be instilling this into the rookies, into the novices on the roster, and they're not even doing that, then what is the point of having that guy take up minutes and space for your team? So eventually, at some point, these guys have to start putting that in their ear. Right. And if they're not doing it, then I think it goes right back to what we've been saying before. It's going to only come out of Steve Clifford's mouth, because it clearly is not going to be communicated by the veterans who are still a part of this roster that are supposed to be teaching these guys the flow of the way things are operated and how things are going with the team and the organization for them to be successful.
Yeah. Good points there. So as always, man, I think, this is something that it's going to be an ebbs and flow situation within the NBA. These coaches are in a very precarious situation, in terms of how they need to handle this, because you're not only coaching for your current job, but you're coaching for your next job potentially as well. And in this position, people will remember. And
one other quick point, Shaw. This is now also on Steve Clifford for him to really etch out who his talking pieces should be for on that roster. It's not just about the veterans. It's about finding guys on that roster that can clearly communicate to the players that he needs to communicate to, that he can't reach. And so to me, it seems like he still hasn't established that. Now, whether that's DJ Augustin, that's Al-Farouq Aminu, if that's Fournier, Michael Carter-Williams, whoever it is. But if you want to reach the Markelle Fultzes, the Aaron Gordons, the Jonathan Isaacs, the Mo Bambas, and all of these guys, you need talking pieces. You need guys that are going to be a part of that front that can communicate, that can trickle down that effect. And I don't think that Clifford has gotten that just yet from these guys, or else why would he have to come out so early and say the things that he's saying?
Good points, man. Good points for
sure. Woo! Hot stuff. Hot take, man. Hot take. We want to hear from you, though. Is it effective for the coaches to be calling out their players guys like Steve Clifford and Mike Malone at this early outset of the season, regardless if this team is successful or not, will this continue to be an effective strategy in order to bring out the best of their players? We want to hear from you here. The Baseline. Be sure to get at us at NBA Baseline. You're tuned. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
Coast to coast.
Time to go coast to coast discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's
All right. Joel Embiid and Karl Anthony Towns representing that Biggie Smalls beef. Oh my goodness, man. And what did one of the social media outlets call brouhaha? I think it was more ha-ha to me than it was brew, but you know, whatever. You know what I'm saying? As long as no one spilled their beer at the front row, man, I guess it was all good.
Yeah, it's a dust up. Two guys who a lot of people are calling it a fake beef because they were AAU friends, et cetera, et cetera. But in that moment, it was very real. So they both got 2-game suspensions. Ben Simmons, gets away with the.
No, the only thing that was real was Ben Simmons trying to put Karl Anthony Towns in the damn WWE sleeper hold. That was the only thing that was real to me.
Again, he looks like he escaped one from there, but we'll see what ends up happening when they meet next. Embiid and Cat, man, I think 2 of the best in the NBA at their positions going at it. In that aspect, Joel Embiid is never lacks drama, boy, never lacks drama. The only thing is, they're 5 games in, he's played 2 games now, and he's 1 or 3 games rather, so 1 missed an injury, then 2 more games now with suspension. So it's just, he's just got to find a way to stay on the court. But
kudos to Al Horford, right? He's the real Embiid right now. He's the real Joel Embiid for that basketball team right now, man. All right, out in Los Angeles, Kyle Kuzma is expected to return. He'll be on a minutes limit for the Los Angeles Lakers, as if they need any more help than they're already getting from this team.
Hey, you know what? The strong continue to get stronger. And Kuzma is a guy who they definitely are going to rely on. May not be too late for him to make that 6th man of the year bid if that's the role he stays in for the entire season. So, glad to see that he's back, and we'll see how he's integrated into this Lakers roster as he gets through his minutes restriction. All
right, out in Chicago, Derrick Rose returned to Chicago, and he was blessed and what's the word? He was graced with MVP chance as well deserved. Yeah, man.
You know what? Shouts to D Rose. Really real talk there, and his journey as an NBA player continues to just be something that's in a lot of ways magical. Being a laughingstock at some point after being an MVP and the people's champ, if you will, and now he's kind of getting back to the point where people really love and respect him again. So Chicago showing him that love, and I think that was amazing.
All right, and definitely, man. I think Shaw. What's interesting is in our next upcoming episode, man, we're gonna have an opportunity to speak with someone who is gonna help highlight the importance of why he is such an MVP and beloved out in Chicago. That interview with Sam Smith. You want to definitely check that out, man. It was a great discussion and talk. And he's going to get into the new book that he's written with Derrick Rose. So we cannot wait to drop that for you guys. So be on the lookout for that. Out in Indiana, Miles Turner, he's going to be out for 2 to 3 weeks. Are the Pacers going to be feeling the blues that Miles Turner is not playing a melody to help them win games?
Defensively, that's a big loss. We all know Miles is a guy who gives him a couple points here and there. I mean, more than a couple, but and decent number of rebounds. But his ability to defend the paint, defend the rim, and block shots is masterful. And that's something they're going to miss in the interim time, especially with Oladipo out. Just having 2 of those guys not on your roster in the beginning of the season where they struggled a little bit is not ideal. But I think in general, this Pacers team has enough depth, and against the bonus can slide to that 5 spot. Don't know too much about the backup center, Goga. I don't even want to say his last name right now. Played well in his first game as a starter, but we'll see what ends up happening for the Pacers.
Well, Oladipo call his crew, his role players, bench mob. So they're gonna have to be steady mobbing without Miles Turner for the next couple of weeks. But I think they may be able to hold their own. Their schedule is a little sketch. It's gonna be a challenge for them, but I think they may be able to hold their own for the next couple of weeks. Finally, Shaw, out in Detroit, Reggie Jackson, he's gonna be out for 4 weeks with a stress reaction in his lower back. I mean, I don't know. Are they gonna miss him? I don't know if I'm gonna miss him, but will they miss him?
No shade, right? Well, this Pistons team struggling, with injuries. Blake is obviously not back yet as well, and now Reggie Jackson to go out for this amount of time. It's a great thing. They do have Derrick Rose there. Tim Frazier is also there, going to get a lot of minutes. But this Pacers team really just not doing a whole lot with Reg, and we'll see what they do if and when he comes back this year. I think it's going to be time for them to move on. Andre Drummond definitely holding it down on all fronts in the interim time until Blake gets back as well. But this Pistons team has seen better days at the point guard position, and Reggie Jackson just continues to struggle.
I find it funny, Shaw, because usually people will just call it he has a hernia, what I'm saying, he has a ruptured disc or it's something. I don't know if I hear this too often, a stress reaction in their lower back. I don't know what you do with that. it's an interesting medical terminology to say that he's going to be gone for a month. You know what I'm saying? He bent over on his crossover and just couldn't get it, couldn't get it back up, couldn't straighten back up. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but I just hope that he does heal quickly, and he comes back and helps contribute for the Detroit Pistons moving forward. Awesome show this week, Shaw. Good stuff all around, man, and great content as always. Breaking down the state of play with the Golden State Warriors. And, whether or not teams like the Denver Nuggets and the Orlando Magic and their coaching style is going to be effective for the kind of season that people have them expecting to have.
Yeah, this was a fun one, I think, for me, for sure. I hope our fans and listeners enjoyed it. Golden State, obviously a hot topic with all the accolades they've received over the last, half a decade, if you will, here. And now the shoe is on the other foot. And, we're not making fun of them, but we are asking some appropriate questions into how they're going to matriculate through the rest of the season and into next year as well, too. And then obviously with the coaching situation, just great conversation there, man. I'm really interested to see what our fans and listeners have to think about that as well, too, because hey, it's a touchy situation being a coach, man. So you go out there and put yourself on the line when you call out these guys, but that might be hurting you in the long run. So, hey, man, can't wait to hear what everybody has to say.
Warriors or Woes? We don't know, but they are definitely going to be a team that will make for some interesting topical conversations throughout the course of this NBA season. Once again, we'd like to thank you and yours for tuning in with us. As always, we love you guys and appreciate the comments and the follow through. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. We do, and we'll catch up with you next time.